Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Andrew Sumner, and once again we are blessed with the presence of the one and only Ram V. How are you, mate?
At this point, Andrew, I think I should qualify as your co-host.
Yeah, exactly. We'll do a spin-off show, which would be exactly that.
Great,
I'd love that,
great.
mate. I'd love that, particularly because you look very well, mate, and
Thank you.
you're doing some great work at the moment about a book, a title that I've always loved. So I've always been a massive Detective Comics fan, the very cradle of DC itself, and over the years, some of my favorite Batman creative teams have been on that book. Most notably for me, probably my favorite ever team was Alan Grant and Norm Breyfogle.
Yeah.
And they just did this incredible run, which really kind of tore up the rule book in the 80s.
Yeah.
Made a real difference actually to the loads of what they introduced has been used in adaptations of the characters ever since.
I keep saying this to people. There's always this kind of ongoing discussion. Is it the characters that define comics, or is it creators that define comics? And I always use this as an example, where when people say they love Batman, like you don't mean you love the original Bob Kane, Bill Finger Batman. You love Alan Grant, Norm Breyfogle Batman, or you love Denny O'Neil Batman, or you love Frank Miller Batman. See, every once in a while, these creators come along and they just change what the character does for the comic, if you will. So I'm a firm believer in that sort of creative vision defines characters or redefines characters for entire eras, and this book has had creative teams like that over the years. So it's definitely an honor to be working on it.
Yeah, I was very pleased to hear when you got the assignment, because I had an idea in my mind about the approach that you might take, which is not a million miles away from the one that you are taking, which is very satisfying for me. Before we talk about that specifically, could you just talk a little bit about? I saw something very interesting on Twitter, which last night, which was you basically running with an idea that Scott Snyder had introduced, just about the nature of these very long-running characters. Could you talk about that a bit? Because I was very interested in it.
Yeah, I mean, Scott's tweet was about his approach to how he writes these characters, and people often say that there's a correct way of writing a character, there's a true way of writing a character. And while I kind of push back against that idea, because if you subscribe to that idea as a creator, then you're only ever going to be writing the character that you read and loved when you were whatever, 16, 17, 12, 13, who knows. But what that means is you're only ever creating another version of something you've already seen. So as a creator, I think part of your creative endeavor should be to reinvent, to push, to tear down, to build some new part up. But then you run the risk of writing a very unlikable character. People are like, this is not the character I grew up with, or this is not the character I read. And so the thing that I found, and the thing that Scott was getting at in the tweet, is that these characters are iconic for a reason, and they tap into some kind of underlying human consciousness ley line, if you will. And if you understand that, then you can do whatever you want. You can turn the character into a sentient jelly, and it will still work, because you understand what the core of that character is, why that character touches so many people on some sort of fundamental consciousness level, right? The first time I kind of experienced that was when I was writing Swamp Thing, actually. I remember having this conversation with Kieran Gillen. I said, hey man, so I think I'm being offered Swamp Thing as a book. And his first reaction was like, ooh, that's quite a task, because here you are in London around a whole bunch of people who clearly go Swamp Thing equals Alan Moore, right? And then to take that and start writing that book, I had to do this to get over that intimidation factor in itself, and that, okay, I'm taking on a character that clearly has had this kind of seminal defining run by an author that inspires awe in so many people. How do you contend with that? How do you exist next to that, right? And I think the key there is to understand the core of why Alan's run was so successful with the character, is because he touched on that character as an investigation of what it means to be human, what it means to chase after your own humanity, right? Basically, what Alan did with that character, once you've understood why that character struck such a great chord with people, once you've understood the core of that character, you can tear everything around that core down. If you, as long as you're true to the narrative purpose of this character, you can do whatever you want. You can reinvent in how many ever ways you want, and you'll still be telling a story that evokes those same emotions in readers.
Yeah. I think that's very true. It's very interesting. I mean, I lived through a whole era where my first exposure to Batman was the '60s. Batman was Adam West, which I absolutely loved. Then I grew up, and then there was that fan rejection of that iteration of Batman.
Sure.
But to the world, that was Batman. But to the fan
Yes.
community, it's Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams. And then there was that legitimizing effect of the world actually coming to accept that version of Batman, like post Tim Burton.
Yeah.
But now, of course, I think what's much more healthy is, as it is with all of these iconic characters, each version is legitimate and equally loved. So it's okay to love Adam West now,
Yeah. And I think that's the beauty of storytelling in itself, is that all of these great archetypes, all of these great sort of iconic characters are lenses to view ourselves. So if you reject a lens, all you're doing is telling people that I refuse to look at myself through humor. I refuse to look at myself through introspection.
Yeah.
These characters are just lenses, and they're looking, really, the stories are all about humanity and not about being superhuman. This is kind of the reason it always irks me when people are like, oh, Superman, I don't know if he's relevant to our narrative today. I'm like, no, anyone who says that just doesn't understand what makes the character so great at its core. This is a function of not understanding what kind of lens that is to look at human beings through. Yeah.
I think that is very well said, and I think you're onto something, and I couldn't agree more. That's great, and to flip that spotlight from what you've just said over to your work on Detective Comics. So your run begins with the Detective Comics 1062.
Yep.
What can you tell us about it, mate?
Yeah, it's the run is intended to be this great, grand, tragic opera that is set in a gothic, over dramatic, sort of deeply, richly colored Gotham, if you will. That's kind of the aesthetic tone of the book. On a functional level, this is a aging Batman who is questioning his relevance to the city. And just as this is happening, there are going to be some new characters coming into Gotham who are trying to achieve what Batman has tried to achieve for years, and are doing it, quote unquote, better than him. And when that happens, sort of Batman's quandary of, am I still relevant? Does the city still need me? It is thrown into stark relief. And the run is then preoccupied with, how does Batman reinvent himself? How do you reinvent yourself when 5 years ago you were a vigilante, you were outside of the system, and now you find the system has melded and moved and mutated itself to incorporate you to a point where it doesn't need you anymore. Batman has been gentrified, if you will.
Yeah.
And what do you do? How do you reinvent yourself when a part of you is going, I'm done, I'm tired, let me be? So yeah, that's kind of the emotional content of it. Of course, all of it great, works with this great metaphor. There are demons in the streets of Gotham. People are turning into these weird, superpowered, demonic creatures, while Bruce Wayne and Batman is contending with his own inner demons, if you will, thanks to an old Grant Morrison character called Barbatos. And so we'll see how all of that features into the narrative.
Fantastic, mate. I mean, obviously the Gothic, particularly the Gothic opera element, influence upon Batman has oscillated in and out over the years. It's actually, it's a big part of the Christopher Nolan DNA, of course.
Yeah,
you know?
of course.
And I think it's a very interesting. I think it's a very interesting window through which to view the character, and the artwork on the book is beautifully complements that concept. What can you tell me about how it's been working with Albuquerque?
Yeah, I think, I mean, when I approach a book, I usually tend to have a strong aesthetic in mind. I have the firm belief that you could write the same story 10 times over. As long as you write it with a strong aesthetic point of view, you'll be writing 10 different stories. And that sort of operatic, overblown, high drama aesthetic is such a difficult thing to achieve, but comics is a medium that is particularly suited for it, because I think comics is like watching a play in a lot of ways, where you don't get the micro gestures of someone's acting, so they always have to act in this kind of overblown dramatic way.
I think that's a very interesting way to look at it. Yeah, I think that's very well said.
So with that in view, when I was talking to the editor on the book, Jessica Chen, we were like, okay, let's get a few artists who we feel have a very strong sense of this aesthetic in their work. And we were going through a list, and everywhere we turned, we were like, oh, no, this is too soon for me. Oh, I don't have time in my schedule. I would have loved to. In fact, we were talking to a few artists who were musical composers as well, and they're like, oh man, this is the perfect project if you had come to me a couple of months ago. And then 3 a.m. in the morning, I get a random email from Jessica. Out of nowhere, I remembered Raphael's work on American Vampire, and I thought that would be perfect. So I emailed him, and he said yes. And it was just this case of, we had very sort of with great intent gone out and tried to talk to people. It didn't work. We were getting frustrated, and out of nowhere, this utterly perfect utterly perfect artist just comes in and goes, yeah, I'll do it. So that's kind of the serendipitous way in which, you know, Rafa and I started working on this. But all you have to do is take sort of one look at his art, and you realize that he is already in that space. So the moment we discussed the aesthetic for this, he was like, oh, I'm very excited, because this is what I've wanted to do with my art, in not only for Batman, but like every project that I've taken on. So this is such a perfect thing for me. And you can see that enthusiasm, that love for that aesthetic come through in absolutely every panel that he works on.
Yeah, he really is the perfect artist for your concept, and quite rightly, Detective Comics 1062 has been a big hit right out of the gate. It's gone to a second printing, and
that's right.
And there's what everybody watching this will be able to order from the links attached to our conversation is the second printing cover, which is a beautiful piece of work. Do you want to talk about that for a second, mate?
Yeah, I've been a huge fan of Julian Totino Tedesco's work in comics in general, but also on cover art. He's such a phenomenal artist with such a great sense of composition. So I had no idea he had been commissioned. I mean, this is just looks like standard format. It's for my editor to just surprise me with these things. But I had no idea he'd been commissioned to do this cover. And then Jessica shared this image with me, which, again, it's such a joy for me to know that basically he was told, hey, we're doing this kind of opera poster aesthetic. So what can you come up with for that? And apparently he reached out and said, okay, can I design like everything, the font, the credits for this cover? And you look at it, it looks like a high quality modern day, contemporary, here's an opera in your town, go watch it kind of poster. And it's such a phenomenal take. And obviously it plays with the metaphor in the story as well. You have this image of Batman's head opening up and this giant flaming orange bat flying out of it. So yeah, it's a great cover. I'm very thrilled, to a point where I think Rafa's printed out some A2 posters for to put up in his home. And then I've got mine that's just being shipped on the way.
Oh
So
man,
you'll see a poster up on that wall.
I can't wait. I can't wait, mate. It is a beautiful cover, and it does serve your concept really well, and it's available right here. It's I can't wait to get into the rest of this narrative sequence, because I've really enjoyed 1062. Can't wait for 1063 onwards, and I can't wait to see how this is all going to resolve, mate.
Yeah, we're playing with. I mean, the resolution is certainly a thing. It's intended to be super epic. I was just talking to my editor yesterday, and I said, "Oh, I've plotted everything for the next 20-25 issues ish." So it is intended, at least by today's standards, to be a long, sprawling run. So fingers crossed we get there. But also the great joy for me is there are such great characters in Gotham and in the Batman mythos, and to be able to take those characters and twist them in little subtle ways, or kind of reset them to a point where I think the next issue focuses a little bit on Two-Face, whose status quo, for those who don't know, in Gotham is that he is recovered. He has had his alter ego removed, if you will. But how long can that last in a city like Gotham? We'll see.
Thanks for joining us today, mate.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV, and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.